Camp Concordia, Kansas, July 1944. The boy stood in the medical tent doorway, 7 years old, silent as stone. His father's hand rested on his shoulder, a German officer captured at Normandy, still wearing torn Wehrmacht trousers and an undershirt bleached pale by camp laundry. The American medic, Corporal James Holland from Kentucky, gestured them inside. The tent smelled of iodine and canvas heat. The boy's right arm hung stiff at his side, fingers curled inward. When Holland reached to examine it, the child's voice came small and certain. "It burns when you touch it." The skin beneath looked wrong puckered, discolored, older than any 7-year-old wound should be. They came to Camp Concordia in boxcars, 600 German prisoners rolling across Kansas wheat fields that stretched flat and golden to every horizon. June 1944. The war in Europe was turning, Normandy beaches still slick with recent violence, and America as heartland transformed itself into a vast archipelago of detention, camps where captured soldiers waited for the world to reshape itself. Corporal James Holland stood on the loading platform, watching them disembark. He was 24 years old, trained as a combat medic, but assigned to camp duty after shrapnel tore through his left thigh at Anzio. He walked with a slight hitch now, a reminder that carried him through each shift with particular attention to how bodies held pain. The prisoners descended in ordered lines officers first, then enlisted men, then the unexpected ones. Women, children, families who had followed German units across North Africa and Italy, dependents swept up in the machinery of capture and transport. They were not supposed to be here. Geneva Convention protocols specified military personnel only. But war created its own logistics, and sometimes the logistics included a 7-year-old boy named Klaus Weber stepping onto Kansas soil beside his father, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, captured outside Cannes 3 weeks earlier. Holland noticed the boy immediately, not because of how he looked thin, pale, unremarkable in the way of children shaped by wartime scarcity, but because of how he moved. The right arm hung motionless, the hand curled into a partial fist. The boy used only his left hand to climb down from the boxcar, to grasp his father's sleeve, to shield his eyes against the prairie sun that blazed white and merciless across the camp compound. "That kid hurt?" Holland asked the camp commander, Major Daniels, who stood beside him with a clipboard and a permanent expression of bureaucratic exhaustion. "Which one?" Daniels squinted at the line of prisoners shuffling toward processing barracks. "Blonde kid. Right arm looks wrong." Daniels made a notation on his clipboard. "I'll add him to the medical screening list. Everyone gets checked anyway. Lice, tuberculosis, malnutrition. Standard procedure." But standard procedure moved slowly, and 3 days passed before Klaus Weber appeared in the medical tent. Friedrich Weber was 42 years old, a career officer who had joined the Wehrmacht in 1935 when Germany was rebuilding itself and the future seemed navigable. He had served in Poland, France, North Africa, Italy theaters that turned from victories into retreats, from certainties into questions he could not answer even to himself. His wife had died in Hamburg during a 1943 firebombing. Klaus was with relatives in the countryside when it happened, spared the flames but not the orphaning. Friedrich arranged for the boy to join his unit in Italy, an irregular decision, frowned upon but tolerated in the chaos of 1944 when rules bent under the weight of too much loss. Klaus had traveled with the regiment for 4 months before the Normandy invasion scattered them into captured fragments. Now they shared a barrack in Camp Concordia with 38 other prisoners, sleeping on iron cots under canvas roofing that trapped heat like a greenhouse. Friedrich watched his son adapt to captivity with the strange resilience children possessed, finding games in dust and wire making. Friends through gestures, since none of the American guards spoke German and none of the prisoners spoke more than fragments of English. But the arm worried Friedrich constantly. It had been injured months ago in Italy during an Allied bombing run that caught the regiment during an evening meal. Klaus had been near the supply truck when the ordnance struck. The explosion threw him 15 feet. He woke with his right forearm burned, skin angry, red, and blistered. The regimental medic had treated it with what supplies remained: sulfa powder, bandages, morphine for the pain. The burns healed badly. Scarring formed thick and rigid, pulling the skin tight across muscle and tendon. The fingers curled inward, losing their flexibility. Worse, the pain persisted long after healing should have completed. Not the sharp pain of fresh injury, but a deep burning sensation that flared whenever anything touched the scarred tissue. Friedrich had requested medical attention multiple times during processing. The guards nodded, made notes, promised someone would examine the boy. Days passed. Klaus said nothing, bore it silently, the way children learn to bear things when adults had no solutions to offer. Finally, on the 4th day, a guard appeared at their barrack. Weber Friedrich. Weber, Klaus, medical tent. Now, Friedrich felt relief and apprehension twist together in his chest. He took Klaus's good hand. "Come," he said gently. "They will help you now." The medical tent stood at the camp's northeast corner, canvas walls staked against Kansas wind, interior divided into examination areas by hanging sheets. James Holland waited there with his medical kit open on a folding table: bandages, scissors, bottles of antiseptic, and morphine, instruments that gleamed in the afternoon light filtering through canvas. Friedrich and Klaus entered together, the boy's eyes fixed on the medical instruments with obvious fear. He had learned during months of wartime medical care that help often arrived accompanied by pain. "Have a seat," Holland said, gesturing to a wooden chair. Friedrich translated quietly. Klaus sat, his injured arm held protectively against his chest. Holland crouched eye level with the boy. He had learned, during 2 years of combat medicine, that children responded better to doctors who made themselves smaller. "I'm going to look at your arm," he said slowly, demonstrating by pointing to Klaus's arm, then to his own eyes. "Just look. No hurt yet. Understand?" Klaus glanced at his father, who nodded. The boy extended his right arm slowly, carefully, like offering something precious and breakable. The scarring was immediately apparent. The forearm's skin had healed in thick ropey ridges, discolored patches of pink and white against naturally pale flesh. The burn pattern suggested blast exposure rather than flame contact, the scattered irregular damage of pressure wave and heated air. But what caught Holland's attention was the texture. The scars looked wrong, too rigid, too extensive. And when he leaned closer, not yet touching, he could see faint discoloration beneath the surface tissue that suggested something deeper than surface injury. "I need to touch it," Holland said, still speaking slowly, still maintaining eye contact with the child. "I'll be gentle, but I need to feel the tissue." "Okay?" Friedrich translated. Klaus's expression tightened, but he nodded. Holland reached forward with careful fingers, barely making contact with the scarred forearm. The moment his fingertips touched skin, Klaus gasped. His whole body went rigid. Tears sprang to his eyes, though he made no sound. "It burns when you touch it," Klaus whispered in German. Friedrich translated. "He says it burns." When touched, Holland withdrew his hand immediately. He had felt enough in that brief contact. The skin was hot, warmer than surrounding tissue, and the texture felt wrong under his fingers. Not like scar tissue, which was typically tough and fibrous. This felt almost soft, like overripe fruit ready to split. "How long has it been like this?" Holland asked. Friedrich conferred with Klaus in rapid German. 4 months since the injury. It healed, but the burning never stopped. Holland sat back on his heels, thinking. Burns this old should not still be producing heat, should not cause this level of pain from simple touch. Something else was happening beneath the scar tissue infection maybe, or tissue necrosis, or something he had not encountered in his relatively limited medical experience. "I need to clean this properly," Holland said. Really look at what's going on underneath. It's going to hurt. I'm not going to lie to the kid, but I'll give him morphine first. Make it bearable." He prepared a syringe while explaining through Friedrich what he intended to do. Klaus watched the morphine bottle with wide, frightened eyes. He had received morphine before, during the initial injury treatment. He knew what it meant, but the pain to come would be significant enough to require chemical courage. Holland administered the injection with practiced efficiency, finding the vein in the boy's good arm, depressing the plunger slowly. "Give it 10 minutes," he said. "Let that work before we start." They waited in silence. Outside, the camp moved through its daily rhythms, guards changing shifts, prisoners gathering for evening meal distribution, the endless Kansas wind pushing against canvas walls. Inside the medical tent, a 7-year-old boy sat with his father's hand on his shoulder, while morphine spread through his bloodstream like temporary grace. When the morphine took effect, Klaus's expression softened. The constant tension that had held his small body rigid relaxed slightly. His breathing deepened. "Okay," Holland said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He worked carefully, using forceps and gauze soaked in warm water to soften the scarred tissue. He had expected to find healed burn damage, perhaps some minor infection that antibiotics could address. What he found instead made him stop, set down his instruments, and stare. Beneath the surface scarring, embedded in the tissue itself, were fragments. Metal fragments. Shrapnel from the original explosion, pieces so small they had been missed during initial treatment, now buried in muscle and fascia where they continued to cause damage. The body had tried to encapsulate them, forming small pockets of inflammation around each foreign object. But encapsulation only went so far. The fragments remained there, moving slightly with muscle contraction, grinding against tissue, causing the burning sensation Klaus described. Worse, several fragments had begun to migrate. The body's natural processes pushed them slowly outward, creating new wounds as they traveled. One piece had nearly reached the surface, visible beneath translucent scarred skin like a dark seed waiting to sprout. Holland had seen shrapnel wounds before, had treated them in Italy, pulling metal from soldiers' bodies in aid stations behind the front lines. But never in a child. Never in tissue this young and resilient, fighting so hard to heal around damage it could not expel. "There's metal in there," Holland said quietly. "Shrapnel, multiple pieces, embedded deep." Friedrich's face went pale. "Can you remove it?" "Yes." Holland met the father's eyes. "But it's going to require surgery. Real surgery. Not field medicine. And," he hesitated, "it should have been removed months ago. Every day it stays in there causes more damage." "We had no facilities," Friedrich said, his voice carrying quiet desperation. "We were retreating. No hospitals. No equipment. The medic did what he could." Holland nodded. He understood. War made triage inevitable. A child's arm, burned but not bleeding, functionally intact despite pain. The child got bandaged in morphine and moved to the back of the line while soldiers with arterial bleeding and sucking chest wounds claimed the limited medical resources. "I'll need to schedule operating time," Holland said. "Talk to Major Daniels. Get proper authorization. This isn't emergency room stuff, but it can't wait much longer either." "The infection risk, how soon?" Friedrich asked. 2 days, maybe 3. "I'll push for 2. Holland looked at Klaus, who sat drowsy with morphine, his injured arm resting on the examination table like something separate from his body. "Tell him he's going to be okay. Tell him we're going to fix it." Friedrich spoke softly in German. Klaus nodded, not quite comprehending through the morphine haze, but trusting because he had no other choice. The camp's medical facilities were not designed for surgery. The tent held examination tables, bandage supplies, medications for common ailments, but nothing approaching an operating room. Holland spent 2 days preparing requisitioning proper surgical instruments from the nearby army hospital in Salina, sterilizing everything that could be sterilized, hanging additional canvas sheets to create the cleanest environment possible under the circumstances. Major Daniels approved the procedure with reluctance. "This sets a precedent," he said. "We've got 600 prisoners here. Start doing surgeries for dependents. Where does it stop?" "It stops with this kid," Holland said firmly. "He's 7 years old. He's got shrapnel in his arm. We remove it, or we watch his arm become unusable. Geneva Convention requires us to provide necessary medical care. Geneva Convention applies to prisoners of war," Daniels pointed out. "Kid's not a soldier. His father is, and the kid's in our custody. That makes us responsible." Holland kept his voice level, professional, but something harder underneath showed through. "I'm doing the surgery, sir." "With or without paperwork." Daniels signed the authorization form. "Don't make me regret this, Holland." The surgery was scheduled for dawn on July 12, 1944. Holland recruited 2 other medics to assist Corporal Stevens, who had worked in a Chicago hospital before the war, and Private Martinez, whose steady hands made him reliable for instrument management. They brought Klaus to the medical tent, while morning light still carried coolness, before the Kansas heat made canvas walls into ovens. Friedrich came with him, silent and pale, watching his son with an expression that Holland had seen before on other fathers. Faces in other medical tents, helplessness mixed with desperate hope. "You should wait outside," Holland said gently. Friedrich shook his head. "I stay." Holland considered arguing, then nodded. "Stand behind me. Don't interfere. If you need to leave, leave. Understood?" "Understood." They positioned Klaus on the examination table. Holland administered anesthesia chloroform on gauze, held carefully over the boy's nose and mouth while counting down from 10. Klaus's eyes fluttered, closed at 6. His breathing deepened, slowed, steadied. Holland prepped the surgical site with iodine, the brown stain spreading across scarred tissue. He selected his scalpel, tested its edge against his thumb, then made the first incision. The surgery took 3 hours. Each fragment required careful extraction, locating it by feel, cutting away the inflammatory tissue encapsulating it, removing it without damaging surrounding muscle or nerve structures. Some pieces came out easily, small enough to extract with forceps. Others required more extensive dissection, following their path through tissue layers. Holland worked with concentrated silence, aware of Friedrich standing behind him, aware of the boy's shallow anesthetized breathing, aware of his own hands moving through flesh with practiced precision. Stevens and Martinez anticipated his needs. Instruments appeared when needed. Blood was sponged away before it obscured the surgical field. Sutures were cut and ready. The largest fragment was buried deepest, lodged near the radius bone, where it had created a pocket of chronic infection. Holland excavated carefully around it, conscious that one wrong move could damage the radial nerve and leave the boy with permanent paralysis. The fragment itself was perhaps half an inch long, irregularly shaped metal that felt hot when he finally grasped it with forceps. He dropped it in a metal tray where it clinked against 7 other pieces already removed. Behind him, Friedrich made a small sound grief or relief, impossible to distinguish. "That's the last one," Holland said quietly. "Now we close." He sutured in layers deep tissue first, then muscle, finally skin. The work was meticulous, time-consuming, but necessary for proper healing. When he finished, Klaus's forearm was dressed in clean white bandages, the surgical site hidden beneath gauze and tape. Holland stepped back, peeling off blood-stained gloves. "He'll sleep for another hour. When he wakes, he'll have pain. I'll give him morphine for that. But the burning," Holland paused, "that should be gone. Once the surgical swelling goes down." Friedrich stared at his son's bandaged arm. "Thank you," he said in heavily accented English. Then again in German, with more words that Holland did not understand, but whose meaning was clear in the tone gratitude, mixed with something like shame, the shame of owing kindness to an enemy. Klaus woke in the afternoon with pain radiating from his arm like fire, a different fire than before. Surgical fire, Holland told him through Friedrich's translation. Healing fire, not burning fire. The distinction seemed meaningless to a 7-year-old struggling with post-operative agony. Holland administered morphine carefully, watching for allergic reactions or respiratory depression. The boy's breathing stayed steady. His color remained good. After 20 minutes, the rigid tension in his small body relaxed. "Sleep now," Holland said. "Your body needs to heal." They kept Klaus in the medical tent for 3 days, monitoring for infection or complications. Holland changed the bandages twice daily, examining the surgical site with particular attention to any signs of fever or inflammation. The sutures held. The tissue looked healthy. On the 3rd day, when Holland touched the skin around the surgical site, Klaus didn't flinch. "Does it burn?" Holland asked. Friedrich translated. Klaus considered the question seriously, testing the sensation internally, then shook his head. "Good," Holland said. He rewrapped the bandages, securing them with care. "He can go back to the barrack, but I want to see him every day for 2 weeks." Check the healing. The daily examinations became routine. Klaus would appear each morning at the medical tent, Friedrich accompanying him, and Holland would unwrap the bandages to inspect his work. The surgical site healed with gratifying speed youth's advantage, tissue that remembered how to repair itself efficiently. Within a week, the sutures could be removed. Within 2 weeks, the incision had closed to a thin red line. More significantly, the burning sensation never returned. Klaus began using his right hand again, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. The fingers, though scarred and slightly stiff, regained most of their flexibility. He could grip, could throw a small ball, could feed himself and dress himself, and participate in the barrack games that occupied children's time in the strange, suspended reality of the POW camp. Holland watched this recovery with particular satisfaction. Not because it represented exceptional medical skill, the surgery itself was relatively straightforward for anyone trained in trauma medicine, but because it represented something rarer, a moment when the war's momentum could be interrupted, when help could be offered and accepted across the lines that divided the world into enemies. August arrived with heat that turned Kansas into a furnace. The camp adapted work details, scheduled for early morning and late evening, midday reserved for shade-seeking and stillness. Prisoners and guards alike moved through the heat with careful conservation of energy. Klaus appeared at the medical tent one afternoon, carrying something wrapped in newspaper. Holland was inventorying supplies when the boy entered, his right arm now nearly healed, holding the small package carefully. "For you," Klaus said in heavily accented English. He had been learning, picking up words from guards and other prisoners, building a vocabulary from necessity and childhood's linguistic adaptability. Holland accepted the package, unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a carved wooden figure, a horse, perhaps 3 inches tall, rendered with meticulous detail. The neck arched, the legs positioned mid-gallop, the mane carved in individual strands. It was clearly the work of many hours, patient work done with simple tools. "Did you make this?" Holland asked. Klaus nodded. "My father teach me." "Before the war." His English was broken but earnest, each word chosen carefully. "For you. Because you fix my arm." Holland turned the horse over in his hands, examining the craftsmanship. It was beautiful folk art quality, the kind of object that carried value beyond its material. "This is too nice to give away," he said gently. Klaus shook his head firmly. "Gift. For you. You make the burning stop." Holland felt something shift in his chest, emotion he couldn't quite name. Combination of gratitude and sadness and recognition that this child had experienced things no child should have to carry. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll keep it safe." Klaus smiled, then the first genuine smile Holland had seen from him, transforming his serious little face into something briefly carefree. He said something in German, too rapid for Holland to catch. What did he say? Holland asked Friedrich, who had appeared in the tent doorway. Friedrich's expression was complicated pride and sorrow mixing together. He said you are a good doctor, better than the doctors in the German army, because you did not ask if he was worth healing before you healed him. The comment landed like a physical blow. Holland didn't respond immediately, processing the implication of what the child had observed, what he had been taught to expect from military medical care. Finally, he said, "Every patient is worth healing. That's what medicine means." Friedrich translated. Klaus nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected, but needed to hear stated explicitly. After they left, Holland sat at his desk holding the carved horse, staring at it for a long time. Eventually, he placed it on the shelf above his medical supplies, where it would remain for the rest of his time at Camp Concordia, a small wooden reminder of why the work mattered, regardless of which uniform the patient wore. September brought cooler air and the first hints of autumn turning prairie grass from green to gold. The war in Europe continued its grinding progress, Allied forces advancing through France, German defenses collapsing in sectors, reforming in others. News filtered into the camp through radio broadcasts and newspapers that circulated among guards and prisoners alike. Friedrich began writing letters home, attempting to reach relatives in Germany through the complicated channels of Red Cross mail service. He wrote to his sister in Bavaria, to cousins in Hamburg, to anyone who might still be alive and reachable. The letters described his capture, his treatment in American custody, his son's recovery. The American doctor removed metal from Klaus's arm. He wrote to his sister. Surgery that our own medics could not perform during the retreat. Klaus can use his hand again, can write, can hold things, can live without constant pain. I am grateful for this, though gratitude toward one's enemy feels strange to name. The letters took months to arrive, if they arrived at all. Mail service between wartime America and occupied Germany was unreliable at best. But Friedrich wrote them anyway, documenting what he wanted remembered, what he wanted his son to understand when he was old enough to process these experiences. Holland also wrote letters to his mother in Kentucky, to his younger sister studying nursing in Louisville. He described the surgery briefly, without identifying details, focusing instead on the peculiar ethical complexity of military medicine. We treat them the same as our own, he wrote, because they are patients first, enemies second. Or maybe not enemies at all, just people caught in the same terrible machinery we're all caught in, waiting for it to stop grinding us down. His mother wrote back with maternal concern. Be careful with your sympathies. James, remember they started this war. Remember what they've done. Holland read the letter sitting in his tent during an evening when the Kansas sky turned impossible shades of orange and purple. He understood his mother's position, understood the anger that fueled it, the righteousness that made moral distinctions seem simple and necessary. But he also understood what he had seen in Klaus's eyes during that first examination, fear and pain that transcended nationality, that made the boy simply a child who needed help. He didn't respond to his mother's concern directly. Instead, he wrote about the carved horse, about the gesture of gratitude that came without words, but communicated perfectly. His mother never mentioned it in subsequent letters, and Holland suspected she disapproved. But he kept writing about the patients, about the work, about the small moments of humanity that persisted even here, even now. November 1944. The war continued its acceleration toward conclusion, though no one in Camp Concordia could predict how long the endgame would take. Rumors circulated constantly. Germany would surrender by Christmas, or would fight until every city became rubble, or would develop some secret weapon that would reverse the tide. The prisoners lived with this uncertainty, maintaining their routines, waiting for history to decide their futures. Holland received transfer orders in mid-November. He was being reassigned to a combat hospital in France, replacing a surgeon killed during an artillery strike near Metz. The orders came without warning, as military orders typically did report to Fort Riley for transport within 72 hours. He requested a final day to complete patient handoffs, to brief his replacement on active cases requiring continued monitoring. Major Daniels approved reluctantly. Klaus appeared at the medical tent that afternoon without being summoned. He had heard somehow the camp's rumor network operated with remarkable efficiency, that Holland was leaving. "You go?" Klaus asked in English. His vocabulary had expanded considerably over the months, cobbled together from interactions with guards and other English-speaking prisoners. "Yes," Holland said. "New assignment? In Europe?" Klaus processed this information silently. "Then you will see Germany?" "Maybe. Probably." Holland knelt to eye level with the boy, as he had during that first examination. "Your arm looks good. Keep it clean. Don't let anyone tell you it can't work." "It works fine now. I know." Klaus extended his right hand. "Thank you for fixing." Holland shook the small hand carefully, feeling the normal grip strength, the normal flexibility. The surgery had worked. The healing was complete. "You're welcome," he said. Friedrich appeared in the tent doorway. He had been waiting outside, giving his son time to say goodbye privately. Now he stepped forward, hand extended toward Holland. They shook hands, enemy soldier and American medic, connected by the strange circumstance of a child's injury and recovery. "You saved his arm," Friedrich said in careful English. "Maybe saved his future." "I do not forget this." "Just doing my job," Holland said. But both men knew it was more than that, or less than that, or somehow both simultaneously, just a job, and yet something that mattered beyond professional obligation. "If we meet again," Friedrich said, "after the war, I would like to thank you properly." Holland nodded. He didn't say that they probably wouldn't meet again, that the war would scatter them to different continents and different futures, that this moment was likely their last shared point of contact. Some things didn't need to be spoken aloud. Holland served in France through the winter of 1944-45, treated casualties during the Battle of the Bulge, participated in the final push across the Rhine. He saw things that made Camp Concordia seem impossibly distant, and peaceful the aftermath of combat, the cost of victory, the human price that newsreels never quite captured. He kept the carved wooden horse in his medical kit, wrapped carefully in cloth. Sometimes during brief respites between casualties, he would take it out and hold it remembering. A Kansas summer when healing was simple and possible, when a child's arm could be fixed with surgery and patience, when the mussy burning could actually stop. The war ended in May 1945. Holland was in Germany by then, working in a field hospital near Stuttgart. He treated German civilians alongside American soldiers, watched the defeated population struggle with occupation and scarcity, wondered occasionally about Friedrich and Klaus Weber, whether they had survived, where they were now, what their futures might hold. He never saw them again. After the war, Holland returned to Kentucky. He completed his medical degree using GI Bill benefits, opened a family practice in Louisville. He married, had 3 children, practiced medicine for 37 years. The carved horse sat on his office desk throughout that time-small wooden reminder that patients were people regardless of which flag they served. In 1982, he received a letter forwarded through a veterans organization. It was written in English, the grammar precise if slightly formal. "Dear Dr. Holland, I do not know if you remember me. I was 7 years old in Camp Concordia, Kansas, in 1944. You removed metal from my arm, stopped the burning that I had lived with for months. I am writing now to tell you what became of that arm. I became an engineer. I work with precision instruments, designing industrial equipment. My hands work perfectly, both of them. The scarring is barely visible. I have full strength, full flexibility. I can build things. My father died in 1967. Before he died, he told me to find you if possible, to thank you one more time. He said you showed him that medicine could be about healing, rather than choosing who deserved to heal. He said that lesson mattered more than he could express. I understand now what he meant. I have 3 children of my own. When they ask me about the war, I tell them about the American doctor who fixed my arm, even though we were enemies. I tell them this because I want them to understand that humanity can survive anything, even war, if we remember to see each other as human. Thank you for the burning you stopped. Thank you for the future you gave me. With deep gratitude, Klaus Weber Holland read the letter 3 times. His hands trembled slightly, age and emotion mixing together. Finally, he pulled out stationery and wrote a response. Dear Klaus, I remember you perfectly. I remember your father. I remember the surgery. I am glad to hear your arm healed well. Glad to hear you built a life with hands that work. You don't need to thank me. I was doing my job. But I will tell you something I learned during the war and confirmed through decades of practicing medicine afterward. Healing is always worth attempting. Always. Regardless of politics or nationality or who started what. Pain is pain. Suffering is suffering. And medicine exists to reduce both. Your father understood that. He raised you to understand it too. That's worth more than any surgery I performed. Keep building things. Keep using those hands. That's thanks enough. James Holland. They exchanged Christmas cards after that. Annual updates that documented children growing, careers progressing, the slow accumulation of peaceful ordinary years. The cards came faithfully until Holland's death in 1997, each one signed in precise handwriting that showed no tremor, no lingering damage from 7 decades earlier. The carved wooden horse remained on Holland's desk throughout. After his death, his children found it and asked their mother what it meant. She told them the story, or the version of it she knew, filtered through 50 years of her husband's careful retellings. She gave the horse to their oldest son, who kept it on his own desk, a family heirloom whose meaning had evolved beyond the specific circumstances of its creation. Camp Concordia closed in 1946, its prisoners repatriated to a Germany that barely resembled the nation they had left. The camp itself was dismantled, barracks torn down, fences removed, the land returned to agriculture. Kansas wheat grew where German soldiers once waited for the war to end. But the medical tent's work echoed forward through decades. Klaus Weber was one of perhaps 300 prisoners treated there for various ailments and injuries. Most were minor infections, broken bones, the ordinary damages of confined life. But each represented a moment when the machinery of war paused long enough to remember that bodies in pain required care regardless of which side those bodies had fought for. The burns Klaus described, it burns when you touch it, were caused by embedded shrapnel, creating chronic inflammation. The condition is well documented in modern medical literature, treated routinely with surgical extraction and antibiotics. In 1944, with limited facilities and resources, Holland's surgery represented something closer to improvisation and standard procedure. That it succeeded was partly skill, partly luck, partly the resilient biology of a 7-year-old body determined to heal. But the significance went beyond the medical outcome. In treating Klaus, Holland enacted a principle that military medicine sometimes forgot, that healing has no nationality, that pain demands response regardless of uniform color, that seeing a patient as human comes before seeing them as enemy. Friedrich Weber survived the war, returned to Germany, worked as a schoolteacher in Bavaria until his retirement. He spoke little about his wartime experience, but kept one photograph, a blurred image of Camp Concordia's medical tent, taken by another prisoner with a smuggled camera. The photograph showed a canvas structure, a wooden door, a small sign reading medical. Nothing dramatic, nothing that explained why he valued it. His children found it after his death, filed carefully in a box of important documents. On the back, in Friedrich's precise handwriting, where Klaus's arm was healed, where I learned Americans could show mercy. 1944. Klaus Weber became exactly what his letter described: an engineer, a father, a man whose life extended far beyond the war that shaped his childhood. He designed factory equipment, published technical papers, trained younger engineers in precision metalwork. His right hand functioned perfectly, the surgery scar visible only as a thin white line that disappeared into the normal creases of age. When his own children asked about the war, he told them the truth, that it was terrible, that it destroyed his mother and displaced his childhood, that it represented humanity's capacity for organized violence. But he also told them about the medical tent in Kansas, about the American doctor who removed the burning from his arm, about the small moment of care that suggested something else was possible. "The war taught me what we can destroy," he would tell them. "But Dr. Holland taught me what we can repair." Both lessons mattered. Both were true. The wooden horse Klaus carved as a gift was one of dozens he made during his time in Camp Concordia. He learned the craft from his father, whittling during long afternoons when there was nothing to do but wait and remember and try to make something beautiful from whatever materials remained. Most of those carvings were lost or given away or simply worn down by time. But the one he gave to Holland survived, passed through generations as a reminder that gratitude could cross any border, that kindness could be recognized even between enemies, that a child's hands could create gifts even when those same hands still carried pain. In the end, that was the story's simplest truth. It burns when you touch it, until it doesn't, until someone cares enough to remove what's causing the burning, until healing becomes possible again. And then life continues, scarred but functional, marked but whole, carrying forward the evidence that recovery, however unlikely, however difficult, can actually happen.